Now, here is a classic Chongo's Paracas skull. Once again, let's compare this, which is the latter period of the Camacho cemetery and settlement, with that shape. Now, again, any medical professional that's looked at this said this is not the result of head binding or cranial deformation. This was likely someone that was born that way. And our radiologist, Ken, who lives in the United States, and a radiologist is the world expert on human anatomy and diseases of the human condition. Nobody else can have a greater opinion than a radiologist. Archaeologists, especially, well, archaeologists know. It's a radiologist or a medical professional that you want an opinion from. And he said, this is not Homo sapiens sapiens. I don't know what it is. It could be Homo sapiens something else. Or he said, maybe it's a hybrid of some kind. He just didn't know, but he definitely said, this is not head binding. This is not a human being. It's something else. So again, it's a comparison of one of the royal Paracas from Chongo's on the right, and a normal human skull on the left. You see the volume difference on the right, you see the difference in shape, the complexity, etc. And then as we delve a little farther into the medical aspect of this, because it's more of a medical study than it is an archaeological study, you see this is basically what every living human being or every Homo sapiens sapien looks like in terms of suture lines. You see the one going across the forehead like that, and then you see the one going backwards like that. That's what you look like, or that's what you will look like when you're dead. Let's compare that with an elongated skull from Paracas. There is no suture going this way. Now, either there's no suture there, or the calcification of that suture, which means that the buildup of calcium over the course of time was so rapid that it's a genetic condition, because we found skulls of the Paracas as young as 8 or 10 years old where there's complete fusion. So either that suture line never existed, or it's a genetic condition that causes it to fuse super fast. And if it's a question of not existing, then again, any medical professional that's looked at this, they've never seen this before, so they don't understand how or what shape the mother's hips would have to be in order to birth an individual with an elongated head. Also, we look at the standard shape of a human skull, and you see at the bottom in the jaw are these two little holes called mental foramen, and there are others here. There are infraorbital foramen here, and what those are for is for nerve and blood flow, because that part of the face is quite far away from the spinal cord. This is nature's adaptation in order to be able to feed the muscles and the skin of the frontal facial structure with blood and nerve flow. So that's that's a normal thing. But on the back of the elongated skulls of especially of the Paracas area are two little holes. And again, when a medical professional looks at that, they say those are likely foramen. Because the shape of the natural skull is natural, as in the person was born that way, then it would be probable, because the head or the skull is so much larger backwards like that, that what nature would have done would be to produce those two foramen in the back in order to feed the back of the skull and the top of the skull with proper nerve and blood flow. These holes are not found in the back of the skulls of normal people, but they're found in every single elongated skull from Paracas I've ever seen, including the later ones that are examples of cranial deformation. So again, this is telling us, I believe, that you started with a population of elongated headed people, a small population from a distant place. They land on the coast of Peru, they settle, and then over the course of time, they have to breed with some local native population in order to stay, or in order to have the bloodline continue. So then also there's this small protrusion here under and behind the ear where you have muscle attachment for the neck. And what's intriguing about the elongated skulls of Paracas is that this shape here is much larger than normal, and that would make sense if your skull was much longer than normal. You would need probably, if not more muscle mass, then the distribution of the muscles would have to be at different places in order to ensure that your head didn't constantly strain, tilting back. And so that would be a genetic adaptation as the result of having an elongated head. And then also, this is called the foramen magnum. It's where your spinal column and nervous system enters your skull, and it's located exactly at the balance point of your skull, which makes sense. That's something that nature would have done in order to have everything balanced. Our bodies were wonderfully designed that way by nature in order to have great harmonious balance. And of course, our bodies are also based on sacred geometry. But what's intriguing is with the elongated skulls of Paracas, the foramen magnum is significantly farther back. And that is not something that would have been done by cranial deformation. That's something nature would have done due to the fact that the skull is longer than normal. And it would have been off balance. So the foramen magnum had to be farther back in order to create a balance point to keep the head upright in a proper way. So the final, this is likely a killing field, a scene of genocide, because all of these are elongated skulls, but this location, again, is called Camacho. It's at the later end or latter end of the existence of the Paracas people. And nobility were buried usually individually or in family plots, some as deep as 20 feet deep. They would simply bury an individual, then when someone else in the family died, they would open it back up, lower someone else down. And so these were like cavernous or tombs. But in this case, all of the skulls are broken, and they show signs that they were struck by some kind of blunt instrument, very little pottery, which is uncommon because the royal Paracas were buried with quite a bit of ceramics and gold and very nice textiles, etc. And so I believe that this is an example of where the Nazca civilization moved in and took out one of the areas of where the Paracas were living. But since there were different Paracas centers, it's likely that word got out that as this genocide was taking place, that it was best to flee. And so it's likely that some of the Paracas people were able to take an ancient road that connects the coast of Peru at Paracas with Cusco, and it's quite possible that part of the Inca bloodline is from the Paracas, because again, the Paracas royalty had red hair, the Inca royalty had red hair. Also, the Paracas were believed to speak a language which is now extinct called Puquina, and the royal Inca also spoke their own language, which also likely was Puquina. Most people who've been to Peru have heard of the language called Quechua, but Quechua is actually the language of the common people. The Inca had their own language, which they spoke amongst each other, and Quechua, which is more properly called Runa Simi or Quechua Simi, was the general language of the Inca population. And as well, most people don't know that the Inca themselves were a royal bloodline, of maybe maximum 1,000 people. The general population were not Inca or did not contain much Inca blood quantum. So not everybody who lived in the Inca world was an Inca. It was only the royal family. Also, in Nazca, you have different shapes and forms. This is the famous astronaut, which is even what archaeologists call it. They call it the astronaut. And this was created not by the Nazca people, but archaeologists all believe, those I've spoken to, that this was created by the Paracas. And what's intriguing about him or her is that he or she is on the side of a mountain, literally looking like he's waving or she's waving at somebody in the heavens. And so that, for those of you, is your possible alien ET connection, because it's quite enigmatic. All the other Nazca figures and Paracas figures in general are on the flat surface of the ground, but this one clearly was done on the side of a mountain, apparently waving either to the gods or to relatives or something like that. And these are actually in an area in between Paracas and Nazca. Again, most people think that it's only in Nazca that you find the geoglyphs and the lines, but in fact, there are approximately 30 major geoglyph shapes, such as the hummingbird and the spider and the dog, etc., located in the Nazca area. Those are the ones that you fly over in the little airplane from the Nazca airport. But if you pay more, you can fly to the area in between Nazca and Paracas, and there you find more than 1,000 figures. This area is called Palpa, which is where Neil and his wife and I and my wife will be going. And the figures here are much smaller, but they're much more bizarre. You can see these figures of somebody with spiky hair, somebody else maybe with an antenna coming out of their heads. The Paracas artwork is really far more complex than the Nazca. It's more playful too, which leads me to suspect that they were a peaceful culture that were invaded by a rather nasty people called the Nazca. And so also the so-called runways that Eric von Daniken made famous, most are located in the Palpa area because the Nazca ones are on the flat surface, the Palpa ones are on tops of mesas, the ones that some people think some alien form cut the tops of the mountains off, but in fact they're natural formations. And that's, if you ever do go to Nazca and decide to fly over the Nazca lines, it's very much worthwhile to also include Palpa. The half-hour flight over Nazca costs about $100. The flight over Nazca and Palpa costs about $200. And if you're only going to do it once, that's not a lot of money to spend. Also, most people don't know, but the largest adobe ceremonial city in South America is located near Nazca and was started by the Paracas culture. It's called Cahuachi. It's a series of very large hills, which in fact are pyramidal structures. I believe there are 30 of them. Only one of them has been excavated so far, but that was a major Paracas center, later adopted by the Nazca after they wiped the Paracas out. And at this location called Cahuachi, many elongated skulls have been found with a hole drilled in the forehead. And these are called trophy skulls. It's believed that as the Nazca culture was dying off as the result of their own mismanagement of the environment, that they dug up the Paracas skulls because the Paracas were absolute experts at growing things, at agriculture. And so it's believed that in the dying days of the Nazca, possibly they unearthed some of the elongated skulls in order to use them to worship or to call to the spirits of the ancient ones in order to try to bring the rains back, but that never happened. And also, this is likely a Paracas culture effigy of someone with an elongated head. It's amazing the preservation quality of the area of Paracas. It's drier than Egypt, or many parts of Egypt, and has salt in the sand. And so this artifact is 2,000 years old, but you see how well preserved it is because of the nature of the environment. And also it shows us through the feathers that the Paracas were trading with people in the Amazon, either directly or indirectly. So they had quite a major trading network. Here again is another classic Paracas. This is where you can see the dark red hair. Again, it's not the result of bleaching or the course of time or whatever. It's been tested by different hair experts, and they believe that it is naturally red and thinner than Native American hair. And here again is a comparison. On the left, you see a 1-year-old, quote-unquote, normal baby skull, and on the right side, a 20-month-old Paracas baby. So it's the volume size of the skull, the shape, etc., which makes the Paracas very different from average or normal looking people. Also in the artwork, and I know it's, speculation, but in the artwork, quite often people are depicted as having red hair or blonde hair, never black hair. And so this again could be intimating from the Paracas to us that they had red hair. We also already have the physical evidence, so this is some artistic evidence. And I'm here going to show you other examples of mummies that have been found, either of the Paracas or Paracas transition into Nazca cultures, because it's likely that some of the early Nazca people mixed genetically with the survivors of some of the Paracas. It's not known whether the Paracas wiped all of them, or that the Nazca wiped all of the Paracas out. They may have actually kept some of them as prisoners and then decided to use their power and nobility as a bloodline to breed into. So here's an example of one in a cemetery in the Nazca area. You see it's red bordering on blonde. And here is an example of one which is the rich auburn color, which is most typical of the Paracas. And it's wavy hair too. So it's so you have these three characteristics: thinner than normal Native American hair, dark red, and wavy. Those are three characteristics you don't tend to find in Native American populations in the present or the past. And even blonde examples have been found, as I said. Senior Juan saw one, I think, 20 years ago that was very elongated, basically a cone head shape. He called it, I believe, Nefertiti, and he said it had beautiful blonde hair. But the unfortunate thing is that so many artifacts of this area have been sold on the black market to foreign dealers or foreign collectors that some of the greatest examples are no longer in Peru. They're likely in private collections in North America and or Europe. So we'll never see them again. That's one of the saddest aspects of this study. And that's why the Paracas Museum that I still am associated with, that's why we preserve as many artifacts as we can to make sure that they're not exported illegally out of the country. So again, this is just a little study that was done by one of the experts, hair experts, of 10 Paracas mummies, saying that the hair is thinner than normal Native American and is lighter colored. And if you have red hair, it's very likely that you have very light colored skin. We see that to this very day in the populations of Scandinavia and Ireland and Scotland, for example. So it's quite likely that the ancient Paracas not only were red-headed or even blonde-headed, but could have had very light-colored skin and green or blue eyes, because those are genetic aspects of having red hair. And the nobility also lived underground in underground houses, and that could be because their skin was so sensitive to the sun, and because Paracas gets about 330 days of sunlight, like nothing but sunshine, per year, that they had to protect themselves by living underground. And this is just another study that, again, talks about the fact that the hair is wavy, thinner than normal. The color doesn't change over time. It will become more brittle, but it will not go from black to red. It can go from red to blondish, but never from black to red. So that's an argument that I've been battling with people for years, but we also had a wig making expert from England who came and visited Paracas on more than one occasion. And a wig expert, of course, is someone who could tell the difference between dyed hair and natural hair. And he clearly said that the Paracas red hair is red, that they were born with that. It's nothing else. Also, we get into the initial DNA studies. So what we know from genetics is that basically everyone on Earth has been DNA mapped, except for those cultures or individuals from cultures yet to be found, which I'm sure will happen, because Neanderthal was thought to be fake up until there was a lot of data for them. The Denisovans were thought to be a fake thing until there was more evidence found about them. The hobbits of Indonesia were thought to be fake until there was a lot more analysis of them. So again, it's possible that the Paracas are some kind of aberration, but that's why the studying has to go on. So what we know from standard testing is you have a or a number of what are called haplogroups, which are your ancestry, and each one of these has a letter. So for example, it's believed that all Native American people are descended from those that crossed the Bering Land Bridge. And so those people in general would be of haplogroups A, B, C, or D, or possibly X in the case of the Hudson's Bay area of Canada. But that's it. Anybody who's Native American, if they're pure-blooded Native American, their haplogroup would be A, B, C, or D. However, when we look at the Paracas, this is the baby with the blonde hair, and the only haplogroup found was U2E1. And U2E1 is from Scandinavia and Europe. We know for sure that this baby died 1,930 years ago. So what's that? That's a long time before Columbus ever came to America. So that automatically is telling us there's something genetically different about the Paracas. And then this individual is not Paracas, but clearly on the left, but clearly is an elongated skull. And its DNA turns out to be T2. And if we go back again, T is Scandinavia. So that's pretty intriguing. And this one again was, this was radiocarbon tested at being about 1,000 years old and was from the highlands just northeast of Lima. So not part of the Paracas study, but one that skull is in the United States. And so since it was in the United States and the caretaker of it wanted it DNA tested, so no governmental stuff was involved. And so therefore we did that testing. But going back to the Paracas again, whoops, we're shot at there. Going back to the Paracas, this again is the mummified one. Here again, you can see the reddish hair coloring bordering on blonde. And this, the only haplogroup of this one is H1, which again is found in Europe and Russia. So that's intriguing. So we're looking at a European connection. And then finally, the one on the left-hand side, which was found in the same tomb as the Paracas baby with blondish red hair, turns out to be H2. And H2 is centered around the Caspian and Black Sea. So there is no way, in general, that that person migrated all the way across Asia and then crossed the Bering Land Bridge to make it to Peru, much more likely of an ocean migration. And that is where my evidence and my belief system is starting to come from, that you're looking at migration from most likely the Europe, Middle Eastern area via maybe the Red Sea or the Straits of Hormuz into the Indian Ocean, past Australia, and then into the Pacific, into Polynesia, and then from Polynesia to Easter Island, from Easter Island to Paracas. Because when we visited Easter Island, one of the elders there, we gave her a copy of an elongated skull just as a souvenir. This was a ceramic copy, and she said, "Oh, those people used to live here." So that means that elongated skull people with red hair lived on Easter Island before the time of the Polynesians. And Easter Island is the link in a maritime way between the west coast of South America and the Pacific Ocean and Asia and beyond. So other interesting examples that I haven't been able to see in person yet. This is a drawing from the 19th century. And you can see this individual's head was the size of its torso. Also, it was a fetus examined by a doctor and also drawn by the doctor. And the fetus was 7 to 9 months old. I bet that this example is in the storehouse or warehouse at the Lima Archaeology Museum, but we've tried our best to try to find out exactly where it is, and I haven't given up hope yet, but we haven't seen it in person yet. And then this was found in an archaeological dig by a Finnish group of archaeologists, I think about 5 years ago, in near a little town called Patapatani. Again, you see the size of the head as compared to the body. And so luckily we were able to go there about a year and a half ago with radiologist Ken from the United States. And he was able to examine the full skeleton that was taken out of this royal tomb here on the shore of Lake Titicaca. That is Ken on the left. That is Antonio Portugal, the Bolivian author, in the middle. That's me on the right. And when we went to the little museum, that is the specimen. And I let Ken look at it for as long as he wanted. We didn't speak of it for the rest of the day because I was in complete shock when I saw it. And so the next morning, he said, "That's not Homo sapiens sapiens." And to make it even more curious is right next to this skeleton is this fetus of a baby. And you can see that the head is the size of the torso, or actually bigger. Both of them were found in the same tomb. They were of nobility. And Ken believes that they were mother and baby, that the mother became pregnant very early, as in most likely about 12 years old, and that both mother and baby died during childbirth. And that is something that radiologist Ken believes. He said, "I'm 90% certain of that." So here we have clear evidence of someone who would have been born with an extremely elongated head. Also, this is a short video. Hopefully it'll work. Okay, so there you saw a newborn baby whose cranial capacity was at least twice that a normal human being. I was able to, it was in a private collection in Paracas. I was able to film it for about 3 hours, and then the caretaker took it away. We wanted to DNA test it, and unfortunately, a day before our team came down from the United States to do DNA testing, the caretaker had sold it for $3,000, and it's probably in the US or in Europe now. So that's another sad case of illegal activity going on of something which is part of human heritage. But that, you know, typical human greed. Anyway, moving along, some of you may be acquainted with what is called the Starchild skull. And this is Lloyd Pye with the Starchild skull, believed that there's only one on the planet. However, this is another one. This is located in the Paracas History Museum that Neil and his wife get to see. It has a lot of abnormalities, including the fact that the eye sockets are slanted that way. No evidence of where the teeth would have been. So it's very, very similar to the Starchild skull. A lot younger. It looks like this one would have been maybe 3 months old when it died. So there's a real anomaly for Neil to come and have a look at. And this is an honest artist representation. The artist's name is Marcia K. Moore. She lives in Florida. She's not a big UFO fanatic or anything like that. She's a very open-minded artist, and she simply took this photograph, and I asked her, can you reconstruct it and tell me what you think it looked like when it was alive? And this is what she came up with. So Peru being a very fascinating country. Also, there are two more possible Starchild-looking skulls that are located, I believe, either in the Nazca or Cusco areas. We haven't been able to nail down where they are exactly, but here's a little film, I believe, which is next, of these two individuals. On my YouTube channel, of course. This, by the way, is the last Inca bridge in existence. Okay, so that's, more intriguing things to continue to study. This is a photograph sent to me of someone who works in a bank in Spain. So they could be amongst us even to this day. There are possible connections maybe between the Basque people and possibly elongated skulls, but I haven't been to that part of the world yet to check that out. And then I wanted to touch on some artifacts that have been found theoretically in the Nazca area. These are two proposed alien skulls. However, at the moment, they're very controversial. I haven't seen these in person, so I can't make a judgment as to whether they're fake or real. There are numerous of them, so that makes me mildly suspicious. And this white coating material is kind of strange. So whether they're real life forms or whether they're fake, I'm not sure. This one I was able to see. It appears to be bone and some kind of skin-like material, but to me, I saw this quite a few months ago, and now I think it's something that was doctored. I think it could very well have been a turtle's head, and that it was manipulated in recent times in order to make it look like it's alien. A lot of money involved with these specimens, and that's always a red flag that maybe some fakery is going on. DNA testing supposedly has been done, but the actual results have not come back yet, or at least I've not been privy to them. But once they do, then that'll give me more of an indication of where we're going with this. This is the side profile of the skull. Quite weird. And this is the underside. You see the two sides of the skull aren't balanced. Supposedly this is the foramen magnum where the spinal column would enter, but it could be fake. I just don't know. And this is fake. So that's my hand, and this was brought to me to look at. Again, it appears to be skin and bone, but it looked very realistic when I first saw it. Since x-rays were taken, I of course sent the x-rays to Ken in the United States, and he automatically within 10 minutes said, no, there's something wrong with this. It obviously looks like somebody took a human hand, maybe an ancient human hand, and cut the thumb and the baby finger off, and then put those bones into place, because some of them are out. They don't fit properly together. Some of the bones are smaller. The bones of your hand, big bone, smaller bone, smaller bone. But if you look at this photo or this x-ray, you see there are little bones and then big bones. You have the ball and socket. You're supposed to have a ball and a socket, and then a ball and a socket. But what you have is a ball and a ball matching. And so he said, somebody's doctored this. And that was backed up by another radiologist about 2 days after that. So this is some doctored specimen, possibly of an original human hand, maybe from the Nazca culture. But it's been very well done. It's quite possible that a taxidermist did this. Again, some reasonably large money seems to have been involved. Whenever you get that happening, quite often it's a sign of fakery, because somebody could hire a taxidermist to spend weeks or if not months to doctor something like this. And I go with what the experts tell me. They say it's doctored. This is another example that came from that area. And again, anatomically, even if it was alien, it should fit together better than this. It's the hips are kind of strange. 3 little toes. Ken, the radiologist, said, no, this is somebody put this together out of bits of animals, or maybe a little monkey's skull or something like that. And then the famous Maria one. Again, this is likely to have been a Nazca individual. It's not that difficult to get hold of a mummy in the Nazca area, which sounds odd, but there's a lot of trafficking that goes on in ancient artifacts and body parts. And so it's quite likely that this was a royal member of either the Paracas, the Nazca culture, died about 1,800 years ago, which fits in with the timeline of the Nazca. And then someone simply altered the hands, again, by cutting the thumb and baby finger off, and then coating it in this white clay, which is not typical of any culture of ancient Peru whatsoever. This clay stuff, there are millions of tons of this in the Nazca area because it used to be an ancient ocean. So it was likely used as coating in order to cover up the fact that the body had been altered. But we're still waiting for DNA results, and I hold off saying 100% what I think it is until we actually get DNA results. And here's the hand that Ken said somebody sliced down through here and chopped these two fingers off and put them together. So that's a professional analysis. And also the buildup of the face to make it look alien is probably a bunch of this clay that was added on. Again, big money involved. There are depictions in ancient artifacts of humanoids with 3 fingers. We don't know why that is, but you know, there is artistic evidence. And here again is the X-ray of the so-called Maria mummy. The head to me looks like it's a Paracas transition to Nazca. The timeline of 1,800 years old fits in with that. So this is another X-ray of it. Have to send these to Ken and get him to count the number of ribs and vertebrae, see if there are anomalies that way. And this is what an actual Paracas mummy looks like. So, and this is a reconstruction by Marcia K. Moore of what a royal Paracas looked like. So again, not your standard looking human being in any way, shape, or form, not a typical Native American looking person. It's my belief at this point that the Paracas were a small population, lived in another part of the world, were under attack by a warlike people, took to the oceans, and over the course of time, eventually wound up on the coast of Peru, where there was basically nobody living in the Paracas Nazca area, just hunter-gatherers, settled there, brought their skills in terms of being able to grow agriculture in a desert climate, and introduced that to Paracas, which is a desert climate, where most of the water is underground, and thrived and flourished until the time came. Also, they were expert weavers, which is a Middle Eastern thing. They had the potter's wheel, which is a Middle Eastern thing. So that's where we are up to this time. So I wish to thank you all for watching this, and take it away, Neil.
Awesome. Thank you, Brien.
My pleasure.
That's very interesting in regards to what you're saying about the extraterrestrial mummies, so-called extraterrestrial mummies. So I know that they said that they found, well, they took samples of the skin and they found reptilian DNA. Do you think like the whole thing, there's a potential for the whole thing to be fabricated, or do you know anything about the DNA results for the skin?
No, no, the results haven't come back yet. I'm in contact with Jaime Maussan, who's very involved in it.
Yeah.
There's also a researcher here, Dr. Anthony Choi, who's an expert on possible extraterrestrial stuff going on in Peru. He has his doubts, but we just don't know. Also, the one problem is the samples were illegally taken out of the country, so the Ministry of Culture is really pissed off. And I didn't get involved because of that, because I saw people rushing too fast at judgment. They either said, you know, within 24 hours, people see a picture of something and they go, it's an alien or it's fake. This is before any scientific evidence comes in. So I hold off my position until the DNA results come in. And that could very well happen between now and the time you come. So we can discuss that when you're here.
Okay, awesome. So do you have time for a couple of questions?
Sure.
All right, so Marine Grace is asking, have skeletal remains been found, particularly of the female pelvis? It seems that it would be important information.
Yeah, that's really important. The problem is that in the ancient cemeteries, because there's so much looting and theft, the tomb robbers literally tear the skeletons to pieces because they tend to be wrapped in ceremonial wrapping. So they rip the mummies apart, trying to see if there's a gold ornament or something inside. That's a major aspect of future research, is again to bring medical professionals to compare the pelvis of the classic Paracas with normal looking people and see if there are anomalies there. So that's why it's only I'm still somewhat in, they call me the expert, but I'm still somewhat in the infancy of this whole procedure.
Okay, and Bethany asks, are those little protrusions under the Starchild eyes attachments for the skull?
Well, that's the weird thing, is nobody can figure out what those skulls are. Any medical person who's looked at it just goes, I don't know what it is. And that's, as I said earlier, that's the classic answer for something like this, because a medical professional only knows what a human or Homo sapiens sapiens look like and the diseases of a Homo sapiens sapiens. So a veterinarian knows more about different skeleton shapes, but nobody, if you're looking at something which is either a hybrid or a lost line of humanity, nobody can, nobody's an expert on that. And in terms of the possibility, excuse me, of alien DNA, one of the samples from Paracas showed a lot of anomalies, as in, again, supposedly every human haplotype has been mapped. And so this one specimen from Paracas, the computer program kept having these little spikes coming up, meaning I don't understand what I'm looking at. I can't match it. So if you were to look at, or if you were to find a human hybrid or a lost line of humanity, that's what you'd have. The program would simply say, I don't know what that is. So it wouldn't say it's an alien. It would say, I don't know what it is. And that could very well come up in the future testing.
All right. And then Speppy says, we're big fans of your work. What do mainstream scientists attribute to the skull volume differences?
They won't even touch the question.
And
they simply ignore anything like that. I used to be attacked for the data I came up with, but all I do is I send more data to them, and they never respond because they can't answer the anomalies, and no doctor so far has been able to. They just say, I don't know why it looks like that.
Do you think these archaeologists are part of like a bigger plan in order to withhold the truth, or are they just don't want to like lose their careers, and they just are so indoctrinated with what they know that it's just a human kind of thing when they're saying that they don't know?
Yeah, I think more than anything, it's a question of they've been schooled in a certain paradigm. They've based their entire career on a certain paradigm. And so they don't want to fight about it. They just want to ignore it until the time comes when they can retire, have their pension, and play golf, I think, in most cases. It's more likely that younger academics will be more open-minded because the evidence is becoming stronger. Our ability through smartphones and the internet to be able to measure and study things is becoming far more profound. So I don't think, there isn't a big cabal or anything involved in this kind of thing. Nobody in Peru really seems to give a damn about it. It's not that they're trying to cover it up. It's just they're trying to sidestep it all.
Right. I read in Graham Hancock's last book that he was saying that for a long time, the alternative movement, you could lose your job and be ridiculed in the alternative archaeological movement. And now that he's saying that the evidence is becoming so plentiful, like with Göbekli Tepe and evidence for maybe Atlantis and other advanced civilizations, the pre-Incan stonework that you show. The time is coming now that that he says that the alternative movement is becoming more mainstream because people can't ignore the truth. Do you agree with that?
100%. And it shouldn't be called alternative history anymore. It's actually real history, because I'm not basing my stuff on supposition or theory. I'm basing it on the data as it comes in. So also, we've depended far too long on very specific experts, as in the case of megalithic works or abnormal specimens of humanoids. You know, we say, well, what does the PhD archaeologist say? But what we should now be saying is, what does PhD archaeologists say, but what do medical professionals say? And in the case of the megalithic structures, for example, the Great Pyramid, you don't simply ask an archaeologist, how was it done? You ask an engineer, a construction engineer, how would you build it? And then you say, given that this was supposedly done 4,500 years ago by a Bronze Age culture, is it feasible? And then you ask a stonemason, and you ask engineers and other, you know, you make it a multidisciplinary study, not just what does the archaeologist say? It's like, that's one field of investigation.
All right, and how come that hasn't been done in all these years?
Well, it's being done. That's the process that's happening right now, because Graham Hancock was the biggest victim of scholarly attacks for decades. So he was the, you know, he sacrificed a lot of his what would you say, just his energy on attacks and counterattacks. And now, because there are so many different people studying all of this stuff, I'm one of many people that they don't have the energy to be able to attack all of us. So we just have to wait for the data to sink in. And the evidence is showing what it shows, that the Paracas don't seem to simply have been normal people who bound their heads, and the Great Pyramid and the structures in Cusco and area were not made by the Inca or the dynastic Egyptians. So we just have to keep digging deeper.
Right. Okay, last question. So I watched your documentary yesterday with, I think it's L.A. Mazzulli, and you showed in there the pre-Incan stonework and how obviously the pre-Inca stonework was way more advanced, couldn't even fit a human hair in them. You said that it looks like that using some sort of technology, these stones were mutated to the consistency of marshmallow, kind of like, and then hardened and, you know, solidified. When was that? Where was that? And do you think that these beings, where do you think they got this technology from?
Well, there's a big difference in that the work that was done in Egypt, we see the tool marks, we see drill holes, and we see saw marks that had to have been power tools, you know, several thousand years ago or years old. They had to have had at least diamond level of cutting technology, which is only 100 years old. So you're looking at a lost civilization that did that work. In the case of Peru, it's much more bizarre. We don't see tool marks. So that's why Marzulli's, I think he actually got that from me, but the polygonal shaped stone works look as though some kind of energy field was applied to the stone, making it malleable temporarily. And then when the machine was turned off, it reset to the desired shape. So that's why they looked like they were squished marshmallows. We don't have that technology. So was it people from abandoning Atlantis 12,000 years ago? Was it aliens? I think those are the only two possibilities. It's either a lost human civilization or it's an off-planet civilization that came and built and left.